Well, I bet everybody's in this room because they want to catch big fish, right? I don't think there's anybody who wants to fish with eels. Eels suck, right? You got to buy them; they're expensive. You have to keep them alive. You got to move them around. You got to, deal with them. There's nothing good about dealing with eels. So why would we bother? It's because they work so well. And I'm going to get into my big bass philosophy, and this is the way I think. It's opposite of what some other people think, but it's what works for me. It's what has helped me catch a lot of big fish. And what I think is that big bass don't spend a lot of their time feeding. I think that they're going to grab something, a big meal, and then they're going to sit. And I'm not talking about schoolies. Schoolies, what are they doing? They're always chasing the sand eels and the spearing and all the little stuff around. I'm talking about fish that are like 25 pounds and up. And if you've ever, even 20 pounds and up, if you've ever gutted a big bass, what do you find in its stomach? And maybe the better question is, what don't you find in its stomach? Whatever it is, it's probably big, right? It's crabs, fluke, flounder, sea robins, blackfish, bergals, big stuff. So a fish like that's going to grab something big, and then I think it's going to be pretty much done. And I think that the bass, outside of when it goes out and grabs that big meal, what's it doing if it's feeding for an hour a day? What's it doing the other 23 hours? What is it doing? Well, it's staging someplace. And, is it staging in random locations? Does it just grab a meal and then, go wherever? Nah, they don't, And I think that they're going to some place that makes sense, some place that breaks the current, gives them some kind of comfort, whatever that may be, whether that's nearby deeper water or I don't know. I can tell you that they definitely do stage and go to the same places because I dive, and I can tell you I know places in Long Island Sound where I can go anytime in June and July. It could be 2 o'clock in the afternoon, hot, low tide, 7 feet of water, and if I go out there, I'm going to see a few stripers. And they're going to be in a spot that's maybe this big over here in this area. And if I go dive there, or I go dive over there, there's no bass there. They're going to the same spot. And they're going to the same damn spot year after year. It's a staging spot of some sort for them. But they're neutral. They're not feeding. And an interesting thing about a spot like that, or the bass in general, you think about all these things they eat, that stuff is all over the place. I mean, how easy must it be? When I dive, I don't think I ever go more than 20 seconds without seeing something that a bass would eat. There goes a sea bass or a porgy or a few crabs. I think it's probably pretty easy for them to find the food. All right, so what good is it if you can find these staging fish, but they're not eating? I mean, we want to catch these things. Well, this is where an eel comes in. Whether they're hungry or not, bass have a really powerful urge to hit eels. And I know I've told this story. I'm going to tell it again because not everybody's heard it. The best example I have of this was one night I was on the south side of Montauk. And I'm up on a rock and getting a few fish, and I've got a couple guys off to the side, and I'm keeping my light off when I unhook stuff, and I get another nice fish, and this one was about high 20s, and I leader this thing up the rock, and I have my light off, and I go to run my hand down the leader to unhook the fish, and as I do that, it's like boom, I hit something in its mouth. I'm like, whoa, what's that? So I block, and I get a little dim light, and I look, and there's this bluefish tail sticking up into the throat of this bass. And I'm not saying a snapper. I mean, this is a bluefish. This thing is sucked down a bluefish. And I'm amazed. So I unhooked this fish. There's no way I'm putting it back in the water in this condition. I mean, this thing looks like it's going to choke on this. So I very carefully reached in by the tail and carefully pulled this thing out. It was at least 2 pounds. I mean, it was definitely over 2 pounds. And he was basically choking on it. But still, it looked up and, it's like, and it saw an eel go by and it has to get this eel. Even if the fish couldn't have been hungry, even if it was hungry, it couldn't eat So what was it doing? Why was it sucking that eel down in that condition? And I think that's just, to me, that's just the greatest example of the drive they have to hit eels. And the fact that they'll hit eels when they're not really feeding, when they're in a neutral situation. So now, the eel becomes a hunting tool to find these staging places. I mean, I have a pizza analogy for that. I mean, I'm pretty well fed. I didn't want to come here on an empty stomach. And, if you put some like potato chips or cookies over there, I'm not that hungry. I probably wouldn't bother with it. You put a pizza slice over there, and that thing is gone. There's no way I'm going to pass that up. And I often think about that with the bass. They just, a lot of times, they're just not going to pass up an eel. And this works into the way that when I'm fishing with eels, I think about hunting big fish. I have no preoccupation with bait. I'm not thinking about where are the spearing and the snappers and all that crap. I'm not even thinking about it at all. All I'm focusing on is where is some good water. What are some situations where these fish might want to go on a consistent basis? And of course, this isn't easy to find. And I'm not saying I find them diving. I give that diving example because I already was catching fish there rod and reel, and I said, this I have to see. Underwater, what's so different? Well, there was nothing different about it. It must have been a current profile on a certain stage of the tide. It sets up right, and it just works. So this is what I'm focusing on. I'm trying to find places where maybe a few fish are going to go on a certain wind, on a certain tide, and in just the right conditions, and there'll maybe be a few fish there on some kind of consistent basis. So I'm not focused on the bait fish. I'm just not thinking about them when I'm fishing for big fish. And that's not to say, if I go driving down the beach and there's a school of big bunker up in the jetty pocket somewhere, well, yeah, I'm going to go over there. This is, obviously a nice situation. But you know what? I'm not smart enough to know where those bunkers are going to be tomorrow or the next day. I can't, I can look at a calendar in advance. I could look at a tide calendar. And if you gave me all the winds for 2011, I could sit down and, look at the tide calendar, look at the winds, and probably tell you where I'm going to be fishing every night. And I don't know where the bait's going to be. But I know where some fish are going to go under conditions. And in most of these places, they are not going to touch a plug. They are just not going to touch a plug. Because I can think of one spot in the Sound where guys have been plugging over it for years and years. They don't pull anything big. You throw an eel, it's a whole different story. It's amazing what's there that will hit an eel that won't hit a plug. And so the nice thing is, if you can nail down places like this by covering some ground and hunting around with something that they can't resist, you can possibly find locations where they're going to stage like this. Then you've got a consistent pattern. Then you can bang away on these things for maybe years.